thinking about mulching your roses? Well, not all mulches are the same. In this video, I'm breaking down 3 best and 3 worst mulches for your roses for you to save time, money, and probably your beautiful rose bush. Well, the major decisive divider between different mulches, between best and worst, would be based on how much nutrients roses need. And there are plants which can survive in the desert, looks the same year round, cactus, cacti, producing only beautiful flowers during the rainy season, and that's it. They don't need a lot of nutrients. But roses and other plants which produce huge growth, huge rapid growth, or they produce beautiful, magnificent blooms which are requiring a lot of energy or a lot of leafy growth, those plants require a lot of nutrients. That's why organic mulches would be very beneficial for our roses. So that's the main divider between good mulches and not good mulches. Organic mulches are so much better than inorganic. And now let's talk about 3 best ones. Well, the best of the best would be compost. And there are positives and negatives to the compost, since roses rely so heavily on fertilizers in the soil, on organic matter in the soil. That's what compost provides, organic matter. It builds the structure of the soil, adds a lot of nutrients, right? The negatives might be, it doesn't really look very well. It looks just open soil. It might harbor some weeds, which, some gardeners are more equipped than others to fight with. And it needs to be replenished very often, on a yearly basis. But the benefits of the compost is so much bigger. I would advise to mix compost with well-decomposted manure, animal manure, and some people are against it, some gardeners are against it. We have to keep in mind that sometimes added manure, if it is aged manure, if it is applied in big quantities, it can influence the pH of the soil, because aged cow manure is, the pH is around 7, which is a little bit too high for roses, because roses like to grow in the soil which is between 6.5 or 6.8, which is slightly on the acidic soil. And if we are overdoing the manure, well-decomposed manure, right, our soil pH can be pushed towards alkalinity. But that is not a big influence, so we can monitor our soil, and the benefits of using manure is so much more because manure feeds the soil. If you're a little anxious about manure, you can mix manure with compost and apply it successfully to your roses. So that's number 1, best mulch, best organic mulch. Second best organic mulch, number 2, would be wood chips or bark chips. The negatives of it would be that if they are not well aged, they can drop the soil from nitrogen, because they would be actively decomposing. So you have to watch, you have to go only for well-aged bark chips or wood chips, and then they are protecting the soil from the elements. They insulate the soil, so the roots of your rose feel nice and cool, and that's important for the roots. They prevent the evaporation of the moisture from the soil, very good, since roses are heavy feeders and heavy drinkers, and they look good. They decompose slowly, they stay put, the wind cannot move them. So all in all, second best would be wood chips or bark chips. The only thing is, if you're piling those bark chips too high, the rodents might find a nice cozy house in them. And we don't want to pile them too close to the stems of the rose, because in some humid climates that can create diseases on the stems. Also, if the mulch is piled too high and it is staying wet for a long period of time, it can harbor diseases or create such a layer of unpenetratable barrier that it can actually not allow water to go in. Once that mulch is bone dry, So what I do in my garden when I have where I have mulch, I kind of like to ruffle it up with my hands to break those connections which are forming eventually between the bark chips, and make it fluffy again, to make sure that moisture can go in, air can go out, and the mulch, the bark mulch, is doing its function in the garden. And the third best mulch for roses would be pine needles, in my opinion. Why is that? Well, pine needles, they are organic, they decompose, they feed the soil, they feed the structure of the soil, they add to the soil, they protect roses from evaporation, they keep the roots cool again. They really look nice. For a long time, the wind cannot dislocate them here and there, and they kind of are full of spaces in between, so air can have easy access to the roots, to the soil. I like all those features. The only thing we have to keep in mind that pine needles, when they're fresh, they are slightly acidic. And to choose between three different mulches for roses, it all depends on your garden. For example, in my garden, between these three mulches, I probably will choose a combination of compost, cow manure, and on top a layer of needles. Why is that? Well, because the soil in my garden is moving towards neutral, towards 7. And roses, since they benefit the soil between 6 and 6.5 or 6.8, some sources say, I want my soil to be moving again into the acidic side. So for that reason, I'm going to use pine needles as mulch. And eventually, through years, pine needles will acidify the soil. And you know what? The beginner gardener might say, okay, so what if my pH is not what roses want? If my pH is 7, so what? I'm going to add tons of fertilizer and my rose will have all the food it needs to thrive. Well, that's not really it, because if pH is not according to what roses like, then those nutrients are locked in the soil and they're not available for the rose roots to take. So no matter how much of fertilizer you're going to add into that soil, rose is not able to take those nutrients in because they are locked in at that level of pH. During our master gardening classes, we paid a lot of attention to this graph. Look at this, how interesting that is. And I shared with you already this graph. Where nutrients are available, where pH is, right? They migrate. You see, some of them are available at this level, others are available at this pH level. And roses love to have all the nutrients available, 6 and 6.5 or 6.8. That is why it is important to pay attention to those, to the pH level of the soil. But I am digressing. Coming back to number 3, best mulch, pine needles. They look great. If you have access to a beautiful pine on your property, you can replenish those needles. They are not pushed around. And some people might say, what about great mulch as shredded leaves? Well, there is a big disadvantage to shredded leaves. They're being blown all around. That's why I didn't include it into 3 best. They're great as decomposed mulch. They feed the roses, they feed the soil, but they don't look good really. They look messy, they're being blown around everywhere, and honestly I don't like them and I'm not using them. I used them last year in my garden. Now I don't like the look. I like my garden to look nice and clean, but if you are not into that look, you like the health of the soil, you can include shredded leaves and make it number 4 best ground cover for roses. Now let's move to 3 worst. So the first one would be stone cover. Stones do look good. You don't need to do anything about them. Critters don't love them. They are all inorganic. They do not feed the soil. They do not feed your rose. Rose doesn't benefit from a cool protective cover. Nothing is happening. It just looks good and gives you 0 maintenance. And really there are very few plants which like their roots to be hot. If I put a plant on my patio and it doesn't really have a lot of pot soil in it, it really doesn't like it. So the same with roses. Those stones, they might look good, but that's not good for the roses. Bad mulch number 2. Clippings from the grass. I see sometimes people do that, but not many. Gardeners are getting tired of grass clippings very quickly. There is a reason why we are not leaving big chunks of grass clippings on our lawn. Why is that? Because grass dies underneath. It is forming this mat, which when it is dry, it doesn't let any air or moisture go through. So the same can happen with the rose. If you would put a lot of grass clippings around the rose, I don't like it. I never use it. I can mix it with manure or compost, but not a thick layer of grass clippings. They do add to the structure of the soil, but they don't really, it doesn't really look good. The clipping cover, it's messy, so number 2. And the third worst ground cover for roses would be fresh manure or fresh bog mulch. Why is that? Well, manure, when it ages, it creates a lot of heat and it will definitely burn any plant it comes across with. So your roses can shrivel and die and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So fresh manure is a huge no-no in the garden with any other plants. You have to wait for it to be aged at least 1 year, better 2 years, and then you can safely apply as the ground cover. Why bog mulch, fresh bog mulch is not good? Well, it can rob temporarily the soil out of nitrogen because it ages and it needs nitrogen to decompose. And roses rely on nitrogen. Roses are heavy feeders, so especially during the first part of the year, during active growth, rose needs that nitrogen to grow well. And if it doesn't get it, because we have fresh bog there, then rose has to share nitrogen with the ground cover, which defeats the purpose of growing healthy roses. So this is mulch number 3, worst mulch number 3. Now, my dear gardeners, if you found this video helpful, please sum it up and share under this video in the comments your horror stories or your best mulches. I'm always reading your comments. Sometimes I don't have time to respond, but I'm very curious what you have to say. So please do subscribe and I will see you in our next video. As always, happy gardening!